Good evening. Welcome to the Festival of Books, Alleghenies 2020 Virtual Author Series. So glad you could join us this evening. My name is Hilary Hawke, and I'm co-hosting this event this evening along with Sharon Hostetler. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Hilary.
With us also working the controls is our very own Wizard of Oz, Dave Pop. Hi, Dave.
Hi,
Dave.
Hello.
Hey. And the person you're all here to see, Ellen Prentiss Campbell. Hello, Ellen. It's so good to have you back at the festival.
It is so good to be back at the festival. Thank you.
All right, just a few housekeeping things before we get underway. For those of you watching live, please post any questions you have to Ellen in the comments section of the Facebook feed. She'll be happy to answer them within the session. And if we run out of time, perhaps we can ask her to answer your questions directly on the Facebook page. And I'd also like to mention an event happening locally that some of you may be interested in. The Cambria County Historical Society is currently hosting the Road Rally North. You take part in your own vehicle and on your own time. You'll set off at the Historical Society in Ebensburg and visit 10 locations in the northern tier of this beautiful county. You can participate until August 12th, and there are cash prizes, but most importantly, it's tons of fun, and you'll support the Historical Society, which, like our libraries, has felt the financial impacts of the pandemic. So please, let's do all we can to help them at this time. Of course, we've all had to adapt to the pandemic. We could never have foreseen a virtual series in place of our in-person festival back in September of 2018, when we held our very first event as the Festival of Books in the Alleghenies. Thanks to the generous support of the Somerset Trust Company, we were able to host our inaugural event in the beautiful setting of the Omni Bedford Springs Resort. It was the evening before the festival proper, and authors, readers, educators, members of the local community gathered to enjoy refreshments and raise funds. From those funds, we were able to buy 250 books for newborns and young children in Bedford County, which were distributed through the Bedford WIC program. Then that evening, we had our keynote author, who is tonight's featured author, Ellen Prentiss Campbell. Ellen talked about her historical novel, The Bowl with Gold Seams, which is set in World War II when Japanese prisoners of war were held at the Bedford Springs Resort. Then she transported us on an amazing journey through the beautiful landscapes and towns of the festival counties, seen through the eyes of writers who had come before her and who had also found inspiration in the Laurel Highlands region. She galvanized the entire audience and set the bar high for all future festival events. So I know you're going to be in for an absolute treat this evening. So I will stop talking and hand you over to Sharon.
Thank you. Ellen Prentiss Campbell was the keynote speaker at the inaugural Festival of Books in the Alleghenies. For 50 years, she has spent summers in Bedford County in an old farmhouse on a ridge. Her paternal grandfather was born on a farm near Greensburg. Ellen grew up in Maryland and now lives in Washington, D.C., but Bedford County inspires her writing. Her new book, Known by Heart, Collected Stories, appeared May 1st, featuring several stories set in the region. Her debut novel, The Bowl of Gold Seams, takes place at Bedford Springs in the summer of 1945 and received the Indie Excellence Award for Historical Fiction. Her first book, Contents Under Pressure, Collected Stories, was nominated for the National Book Award. A former psychotherapist, she now writes full-time. Presently, she's at work on a new novel. Ellen?
Thank you so much. And it's really wonderful to be back at the festival. Social distance doesn't have to mean emotional distance. And with books, we can always travel in our imaginations. before we started this evening and at intervals as I'm talking, you'll see a picture loop, and it's pictures of the childhood home I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, sort of a modern home, pictures of the big bungalow in Rockville, Maryland, my family and a former occupant's family, because that big old bungalow in Rockville, Maryland, and my childhood home in Maryland also became inspirations for my stories. And you'll see some pictures from Bedford County, from the farm where I'm sitting tonight on the back porch, looking out over the beautiful valley below. I have to warn you, since I'm on the porch, there's a possibility you'll hear birds. There's a possibility a motorcyclist might go by to catch the breeze and the view. But I am enjoying so much being here with you and being in Pennsylvania tonight. You know, the festival 2 years ago really helped inspire my new book. At the festival, I met poet Todd Davis from Altoona when he read aloud from his work at the Briar Valley Tasting Room. And after he read, he talked about his process of putting a collection of poetry together and his thoughts and observations about grouping poems into a collection really stayed with me and inspired me later on as I began pulling stories together for this new collection, the collection which became my book, Known by Heart. So I'm really thankful to the festival for bringing Todd Davis, the poet, to the festival and for the chance to meet him. But you know, my greatest gratitude is to the beautiful region of Western Pennsylvania and the Alleghenies. This region has inspired so much of my work. Maybe it was chance, maybe it was fate that Granddaddy Campbell was born on that farm in Greensburg. He later moved to Tennessee and then Illinois. But about 80 years after his birth, my parents fell in love with our place here in Bedford County. And it was just the right distance for a weekend away from suburban DC. Now, you know, there's a children's book I absolutely love. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's called The King Who Reigned, R-E-I-G-N-E-D, The King Who Reigned. Every page in the book is a play on words. So for example, the king who reigned shows up in the book as a king with rain coming out of his fingertips. One of the pages in the book, the caption is, "My father always told me that I should live in the present." And the illustration is a little girl standing beside an enormous gift-wrapped package with a door in it. And she's looking at this package with a door in it. And I have to say, when I'm here in our farmhouse in Bedford County, I really feel as though I'm living in the present, in the gift that this beautiful region and my parents gave to me and my family. I want to tell you a little bit about how this region and place, especially homes, inspire my writing and inspire my fiction. I'll start with last month. I had heating oil delivered to the farm, to the rusty, almost totally empty tank in the cellar of the old farmhouse up on the ridge. We're mostly here in the summers and have been for 50 odd years, and fall weekends and spring weekends. But occasionally we're up here when it's quite cold. There've been some memorable Christmases. And even though it was a very hot day for a fuel delivery, I know it will be cold even by the end of September. It was the first visit for this particular delivery man. And when he came into our dirt floored cellar, he almost bumped his head on the huge hand-hewn beam above. There's not much headroom in the cellar. He patted the beam and he said, "If these walls could talk." Well, I told him, these walls do talk to me. And he seemed to understand, although maybe he went home to tell his family about the crazy lady from DC. But to me, the walls in this farmhouse in Bedford County do talk. Originally log, then covered by clapboard, then covered by tar paper, and finally by the siding behind me. These walls talk, and I listen. And just as the walls here at the farm talk to me, when I remember the house I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, that modern post and beam house, a modular house built as state of the art in 1957, the walls talk there. That house is flimsy, that house is gone, but the walls are still talking and inspiring stories. And when I remember the oversized bungalow in Rockville, Maryland, built in 1924, where several families before us lived and where my husband and I raised our family and lived for almost 30 years, before downsizing to an apartment in DC, which makes getting up to Bedford much easier. When I remember that bungalow, the walls are still talking. But especially here up at the farm, I hear echoes of remembered voices and of voices from families who have lived here in the many years before my family came here. And sometimes when I sit on the back porch, as I am now, and I look down the meadow to the spring at the foot of the meadow, or drive along the ridge looking out at the view of cloud and shadow and fields, I feel as though the voices of people I've never known, but the spirits of this region, are talking to all of us if we have the time and will to listen. After many years not writing fiction, I started writing fiction again up here on this ridge in Bedford County. And it was really almost an instinctive response to 9/11 and to my parents' coincident, unrelated deaths soon after 9/11. It was the memories all around me in this old farmhouse in Bedford County that inspired and became my first stories, the stories that were collected and published as Contents Under Pressure. And then it was an episode in the history of the Bedford Springs Hotel that summer of 1945, when the Japanese diplomats captured in Europe and sent to Bedford County were prisoners there. It was learning of that episode in Bedford Springs Hotel's history that became my historical novel, my first novel, The Bowl with Gold Seams. This farmhouse is the only one of the homes, of all the homes I've lived in, that I still inhabit. But all of the homes I've lived in inhabit me. At night, if I can't sleep, wherever I am, I like to walk through all my remembered homes. And those midnight rambles take me into a zone where memory and imagination overlap, where friendly, beloved ghosts and imagined families populate the houses and my stories begin. A fiction writer's tools are words and imagination. I have always loved words and books. In fact, just before we went to the computer, my husband and I were laughing because I found a diary I kept when I was 11 years old up in the attic here at the farmhouse. And in that diary, I didn't have this memory at all till I read it just a few minutes ago. I say, when I grow up, I am going to be an author. And I go on to say that my husband will be a book critic, but not of my books. And then I crossed out book critic and I said, My husband will be a photographer. But I've always loved words and books, and I am so glad that the festival promotes libraries and literacy. I still remember signing my name in labored cursive for my very first library card. And I have to tell you, I stopped at the Bedford Library on Friday as I drove up here because I desperately needed a copy of Charlotte's Web, and I didn't know in which box it was in the attic here. And the Bedford Library had Charlotte's Web, and I have it with me, and it's going to help me with my next book review. Last year, I learned a new word, and I love learning new words. I learned this word from a friend who lost her home in the Camp Fire last year in California. The word is Welsh, and I may pronounce it wrong. Hiraeth. It means longing for a home you cannot return to, nostalgia for an idealized place. Well, I'm a Celt, and I have a mournful streak and a tendency to gaze into the rear view mirror at the vanishing point. I do often forget to live in the present. Hiraeth sparks many of my stories, and the yearning for a place is bigger than the yearning for a remembered home and family. It can also be the yearning and love for the natural world of the region, for the community and the history of the people of the region. I'm going to read a couple of examples from the stories in my new collection, Known by Heart, just to give you an idea of how this works for me. Now, Known by Heart, I think of as a collection of love stories. They're untraditional love stories. They're not bodice rippers. They're not romances. They're stories about people who care about each other, not always successfully, parents and kids, siblings, friends, partners. Known by Heart is about love, and it is in a minor key because I think that we all know every love story ultimately ends with goodbye. But I also know, as William Penn said, that death cannot kill what does not die. And I know my internet is unstable. I hope it won't kill my voice. You've got a screenshot Dave took of me, and I'm going to go on talking, and I'll go on reading. I'm going to read to you first a very short passage from a story I call Estates and Trust. And it's an example for you of the inspiration I draw from this particular farmhouse. But I have to remind you, it's fiction, not memoir. So it's inspired by this house, but it's not this house. And by the same token, the characters who recur in many of my stories in the collection are fictional characters. You'll hear this story is mostly from Kate's point of view. And Kate is a woman in her 40s whose father has just died. She and her sister Frances have just had his funeral, and she has come up to the family summer house from their home in Pittsburgh. And remember, it's fiction, not memoir. I went to a bookstore reading of one of my favorite authors once. She was reading from a new novel. And after she read, one of the people in the audience said, "So, that novel, is it based on your family?" Before she could even answer, someone else in the audience called out, "It certainly isn't. That family has got to be my family." So in a way, I feel like if fictional characters resonate with us, there's a universal quality to it. And we claim characters we love in books, almost the way we claim our own family. So here are a couple of pages from the story, Estates and Trust. Kate took Route 30, the Lincoln Highway, to Bedford instead of the turnpike. The clock at the corner by the bank was gone. Otherwise, the quiet streets of gray stone buildings were unchanged since her last visit 6 years back. She drove past the fairgrounds, past the Come Clean laundrette to the diner shaped like a giant coffee pot. The silver paint was peeling off the pot's tar paper sides. She drove out of town toward the village, red roof of the Methodist Church belfry. Last week, browsing through a Chicago bookshop, dazed with grief, passing time until she flew east, she had picked up a glossy guidebook for Pennsylvania and found a photograph of this familiar square belfry. It was like discovering a local girl in a fashion magazine. Her reflex had been to buy the book for her father. He had taken such a proprietary interest in this region. The road wound through the village and up the steep ridge to the farm. Early in March, no leaves obscured the bare bones of the Alleghenies. The walnut tree still stood sentinel out front, but the massive bough where their swing had hung was gone, struck by lightning. The tree looked unbalanced, like an amputee. On the porch, she looked out across the valley at the distant ridges. The view her father loved would be eternal, whatever happened to the farm. Or would it? There had been talk of fracking, and wasn't that a windmill? Inside, it was dim. Her father left the curtains drawn as a security measure. The room was cold as the mortuary where she had last seen him. She opened the frayed muslin curtains her mother had made on her Singer featherweight. The room was the same: braided rugs, oak dining table with clawed feet, hickory rocking chairs. Hard to believe her parents were gone forever, not just away. His typed instructions for turning on the furnace and the water hung on the hook at the bottom of the cellar stairs. Her mother had lovingly scoffed about the degree of pedantic detail, but now it was comforting to have him tell her what to do. She flipped the furnace switch and it shuddered on. She closed the valve on the pipes across the ceiling and turned on the pump. Kneeling by the water tank, she held the little lever at the precise 45-degree angle he prescribed. Oh no, an unexpected cascade of water was splashing somewhere in the cellar. Kate turned off the pump and went to investigate. The dirt floor in the former coal room was already wet. The thin copper pipe above had split. Her father must not have drained the water properly the last time he was here. The pipe had frozen and burst. And so that's where I will leave Kate, with that wet floor in the basement. And I want to read you again just a couple of paragraphs from a story that gives a little bit more of an example of how my work is inspired not just by this particular house, but also by this beautiful region of Western Pennsylvania. So the next story I'm going to read you a couple of paragraphs from is called Surprise Boxes, and it's set in and around a village. And in the village is an old church, which has been turned into an antique store, really a junk shop. And a retired minister runs the antique store, and he lives in the church. And the story is from the point of view of a young girl who lives next door to the junk shop. She's been away at college and she's come back. She used to work for him after school, and she's going to help out while she's home from college. Margaret is her name, and Margaret has just stepped into the store. Margaret, let me give you a tour. Refresh your memory as to where things go. The sanctuary was crammed with table linen, sheet music, books, buttons, postcards, and costume jewelry. His inventory was always more junk than antiques, except for the glass-fronted cabinet of bone china. I still have my weakness for fine china, he said. I can't ever let a pretty piece go unclaimed, no matter if it chips or cracked. One man's trash is another man's treasure. Once I had been helping in the shop when a customer exclaimed, "Oh, this is my grandmother's pattern," as though her grandmother were restored to her with the pink flowered saucer. It did seem possible in the clutter of his shop to find something precious that had been lost. We squeezed down narrow aisles between card tables. "Here are the salt and pepper shakers," he said. "I keep an eye out at the sales for the ones shaped like fruit, the ones you always liked." When I was his after-school helper, I started a salt and pepper collection, purchasing 1 or 2 a week. He would have given them to me, but I preferred to pay 25 cents a set. He flipped on the light in the stairwell and I followed him upstairs. "The choir loft is still for clothes and hats. I put everyday dishes, board games, jigsaw puzzles, and picture frames up here too, when I can climb the stairs. My hip's a bit gimpy." I saw the old dressmaker's dummy he had rescued from a dumpster at the women's clothing store in town. We had named her Esmeralda. I used to dress her up in outfits culled from the cast-off clothes. Now she leaned in the corner of the choir loft, draped in an old wool coat. "Esmeralda!" "Yes," he said. "I wish I was aging as gracefully as she is." He made his way downstairs and sank into his chair by the cash register. "I'm not up for a trip to the basement today. Check it out. Then we go to the garage and start work." The basement was still a dank catacomb of little rooms packed with tools and pots and pans. I climbed back upstairs. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I replied. "Well, no rest for the weary," he said. We walked through the shop and kitchen and out the back door to the garage. The folding table he kept for sorting was covered with boxes. "I've fallen behind. Glad you're here." I fished in the cartons, handed each item over, and watched him deliberate before writing a price on the label. "This treasure is ready for the floor. Find it a spot. Remember, like goes with like," he said. After we finished, he said, "There's a good sale advertised in the Gazette. Let's go." He hung the closed sign in the window and locked the door. Early spring was quiet. No need to worry about missing customers. "Be my chauffeur, please." Driving his dilapidated station wagon, my attention on the twists and turns of the road, the cotton fog in my mind cleared. The quiet road unrolled. Tree branches were misted with fresh green leaves. We rode past red barns emblazoned with "Chew Mail Pouch Tobacco, Treat Yourself to the Best," and big metal mailboxes planted hopefully by the end of long drives leading to weather-beaten farmhouses. And that's where I'll stop before they get to the sale, before they discover the treasures. But I wanted just to read to you a little bit so you'd know the kind of inspiration I draw from being here. So thank you so much. You know, regional fiction is not limited in appeal to people who know the region, but those of us who do may read it with an extra layer of understanding. Regional fiction transcends the region and becomes stories that are universal. And that's the wonderful truth and trick of fiction. When it works, the life of one imagined person or family in a real or imagined place opens the door and pulls the reader in. And as a reader, we are enlarged by the story, connected both to the particular story and to what it may stir in us. You know, the reason I called this collection of stories Known by Heart is because of the deep reverberation I feel in my heart when I drive the familiar roads of Bedford County, especially up the ridge and round the bend waiting for the farmhouse to come into view. And I feel that same reverberation in my heart when I drive through my old neighborhood in Rockville, down the street where my kids used to walk home from the school bus, and I pass our old house with its deep eaves and porches. And it's a deep heart's ache I feel for the house I grew up in, bulldozed and replaced by another. I don't ever drive down that street in Rockville anymore, but I visit the house in memory and dreams and set stories there as well. So thank you so much for listening. I'd love now to talk and answer your questions. And thank you again for listening.
Ellen, I have a question for you.
Okay, shoot.
What advice would you offer to yourself as a writer if you could travel back in time?
I would tell myself, start writing way sooner. I would say start writing way sooner. You know, I always kept a journal and I was always keeping notes, but I took so many years break in writing fiction. So that's one thing I'd say. And I'd also say read all the time.
I have a question, and it's related to your journal, Ellen. You wrote in your journal that you were going to be an author, and your husband would have been a book critic, crossed out photographer. What's his job?
My husband, whose job is, he's an attorney. His second job is he's my editor. He reads everything I write, and he has a good eye and makes wonderful comments. But he's neither a photographer nor a book critic.
Well, he does a good job and you do a good job, because those pieces that you just read were beautiful.
But also in that same journal entry, when I was 11 years old, I said that we were going to live in Nebraska.
Well, we can't get it right all the time. But I too certainly enjoyed your reading, because there was a lot of detail that I could personally attach to while you were reading those particular stories. So I would also like to ask you, what is your ideal writing experience and what is your ideal reading experience?
Oh, well, you know, my ideal writing experience is pretty much right here. You know, when I'm here and I can look out a window and see this beauty, or I can go up to the attic and rummage around in boxes that have things like this forgotten 11-year-old's journal. That's a pretty ideal writing experience for me. But, you know, but I've been lucky in that wherever I am, if I've got my trusty laptop, because that's the way I write, and I've got an idea, I can begin writing. But I have to say, Sharon, I just learned from rereading that 11-year-old's journal that the study I was going to have was book-lined and covered with tapestry on the walls. And that didn't quite happen. As for my ideal reading experience, I love to read anywhere and I love to read anything. You know, I mean, if I don't have anything else to read, I'll read cereal boxes. But what I love to read most is fiction. And what I really love, is for it to be a rainy day and be snug inside with that sense of permission to read, and curled up in a chair or curled up in bed and reading.
Beautiful, beautiful image. We have had a few people say hello. So hello, Denise, Jen, Laura, Constance.
Oh, how wonderful. Thank you all for coming.
Constance says,
that is
sorry to interrupt you. It's so hard with these Zoom things to give space. But Constance says, loved seeing your photos and hearing your personal stories of inspiration. Thanks for sharing, Ellen.
Thank you, Connie.
And we have a question from William Simmons. He asks, when do you write? Morning, evening? What's your approach to writing?
Well, I've always been someone where when it gets dark, my eyes close. Sometimes my eyes close even before it gets dark. But that also means I wake up early. And when I started writing fiction again and was still working full time as a psychotherapist, when I woke up around 5, I would get up and start writing. The morning is my best writing time still, but I have to admit, given the luxury now of retiring from social work, I love to have breakfast and I love to have coffee before I start writing. But morning is when I do my best writing. And what I'm doing right now is what I often do actually, is I have to sort of try and trick myself into keeping at my current project, because I don't have writer's block, but it's very easy. And Sharon and Hillary, you may write, and folks who are listening, I know, may write. It's so easy to feel just kind of a little bit clamped up when you think, oh no, I have to start. So what I'm doing right now is not uncommon for me. I tell myself I have to write 1,000 words before I can do anything else. And if I write that 1,000 words, even if they're repetitive and they're rough and they're junk, I've started the wheels going. And at that point, then, if I want a break to read something, or I want to work on something that's a little easier for me to get my arms around than fresh fiction, like a book review, then I can do that. But morning is my writing time.
You mentioned before that you had gone into the library to take out Charlotte's Web. So why don't you tell us why you have taken out Charlotte's Web?
I have taken out Charlotte's Web. I read, something I love to do is read, as you already know. And for those of you who love to read, I, as an author, know that there is a great need for people to read and review books. So several years back, my trusty husband, who's not a photographer, but does have his uses, said, you should look into reviewing books. And here's one place in Washington, the Washington Independent Review of Books. Give them an email and say you're game. So for several years now, I've been reviewing books for the Washington Independent and also for an online journal called the Fiction Writers Review, and for several other online journals. And what it means is, if you're a reader, you have the fun of getting books. Now, everything you get and read isn't necessarily something you love, but once in a while you read something that you just absolutely love. And so I've just read a book called Beneficence, and it's going to come out not until September. But it is a beautiful book. It's a book it's a novel for adults, but it reminded me deeply of Charlotte's Web. And I thought, before I write that review, I just have to have a copy of Charlotte's Web in my hands. So next week, I'm going to be working on that book review, and I have Charlotte's Web in my hands. But I love libraries. My husband and I selected our house in Rockville because it was walking distance to the library, and our kids could walk to the library. And when we moved from that house in Rockville, it was really important to me that our new apartment in DC be walking distance to a library. And one of my daughters was saying she still remembers when she went up to the farm with my parents for vacations with them and vacations away from us, that if she was really lucky, my mother would take her down to the village when the bookmobile came, and she got to go to the bookmobile. I mean, I just think libraries they're just one of our greatest resources.
You also mentioned, or I mentioned when I was reading biography, that you were working on a new book. This is really a difficult time to launch a book. So what can we do to help you?
Oh, what a lovely question. Well, Known by Heart, this collection of short stories that I just read to you from, it came out May 1st. And so there were no in-person book events. It's been absolutely terrific to have events like this, where I have the pleasure of seeing people who could never all be in one room at one time any other way. But what's really helpful is if you read my book or anyone else's book, it really does help. Even if, as I hope, you bought it from one of your favorite independent booksellers, it really does help if you write a little Goodreads review, or if you go on Amazon and like my book or someone else's book, because it helps people find out about it. And then also, I would say I love doing book groups. And if you read my new book or any of my books and you'd like me to virtually come to your living room and your book group, invite me. I'm happy to go. If you go to my website, you'll find ways to contact me. You'll find links to other things I've written, essays and book reviews. And you can contact me through my website. And I really am, it's just a joy to me. You know, one of the greatest things that ever happened to me was after my novel came out, someone contacted me who's become a very dear friend. And I didn't know her when I was writing the novel, but it turns out she almost could have been a character in my novel. She was a child at that hotel during that summer. So I am always open to the possibility that a reader will become a new friend.
So are you in a book group?
You know, that's a great question, Sharon. And I, until this spring, had never been in a book group. I had talked at more than 50 book groups, and I love going to book groups, and the readers are the best, and they are careful, and they ask great questions, and they make me feel like my characters are alive out there. But I love reading so much, and I am so darn independent when it comes to what I read, that I felt like I never wanted to be in a book group because I didn't want anyone ever again telling me what I had to read. I had had enough of that in school. But something happened during the pandemic, and that was, like many of us, I got lonely. And so I had an opportunity to join an online book group that was reading War and Peace, just 15 pages a day. It was a huge book group on Twitter. It was people I didn't know at all. It was sponsored by a wonderful journal called A Public Space. And so I read my 15 pages with that huge book group for 3 months until we finished War and Peace. And then I started reading their next book, which I'd read before, The Turn of the Screw. And then the group went on to read a book I had never read before that I just finished yesterday called The May Trees by Annie Dillard, and I loved it. And so lo and behold, I'm now a member of this gigantic international book group on Twitter. And P.S., it inspired me to start an online book group in my apartment building, because many of us love to read and we can't see each other now except, you know, at a distance in the laundry room. So right now we're reading Middlemarch. And it's my first book group with people I know.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And I have to say, my book group did read your book, but instead of we didn't Zoom with you. I'm not sure we knew about it at the time, but we took a day trip down to the Bedford Springs Resort and had lunch and had a tour. So
oh, even better. You know, actually, I once a book group invited me to come join them at the Bedford Springs for lunch, and I did.
Excellent.
But I think that's marvelous. And I love the way book groups sort of take on a character of their own. Everyone I've visited has been different.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, I have a question, and this question is from Monique. She says, Ellen, I'm always intrigued by the way authors develop characters that are totally different from themselves. What is your mental process to develop individual characters?
Hello, Monique. I was with you just yesterday. Thank you for listening. Well, what happens for me is something, you know, something triggers a character. It may be something someone I don't even know says, starts me thinking along a certain line, or it may be there's a person I know who has a certain characteristic that just intrigues me, and I sort of glom onto that and begin to imagine around it. My trusty husband says that I often make a lot of assumptions and I often imagine a lot around little details. And that's true, but I think that's what happens with fiction. And so then once I sort of have a notion as to who a character might be, I begin really building it in every way. You know, I need to know about what that person likes or doesn't like to eat. I need to know what that person likes and doesn't like to read, because that's always important to me. Sometimes I need to know who a character is afraid of or what a character's difficult experiences have been. But my fiction is really character driven. You know, it's much more driven by people than by action. And so it's very important to me to know a character sort of from the inside out. But there can be surprises. That's the other thing that's wonderful, is it's really not that I know all about a character before I start writing. It's that it's sort of a process of preparing to know that character and then being surprised by, when I show up and start writing, what that character may ultimately have in store for me that I didn't know.
And are you part of a writing group?
You know, I've had the good fortune to be part of some wonderful groups of writers. When I first started writing fiction again, I went to the Bethesda Writers Center, which is a terrific place in Bethesda, Maryland, where I was able both to take classes, and then I joined with other writers, and we met monthly and critiqued each other's work. And it was and is a marvelous opportunity. Then after that writers group, I did a graduate degree, that was a remote degree. So I went twice a year to Bennington College to study with some wonderful writers and colleagues, and then spent the rest of the year writing from home and connecting by exchanging manuscripts. And that habit of connecting by exchanging manuscripts has stayed with me, so that I'm still exchanging manuscripts with friends, online or sometimes through the mail, though I no longer go physically to a book group. And then I also have to say, my first writing partner was my friend who I met when I was 8. And I was reminded when I was reading that 11-year-old's journal that she and I were writing a book together, and we were writing chapters and mailing them back and forth to each other. So I'm in connection with writers, but not formally in a writers group.
Well, thank you. Do you have any good news to share with us?
Well, one piece of good news that's really fun for me is I've just started a blog. And so the blog is called Girl Writing. It's called Girl Writing because this beautiful picture on the cover of my new book is a painting I have loved since I was a girl writing many years ago. And it's a painting that's in the collection of the Phillips Gallery in Washington, D.C. And it's by an artist named Milton Avery. And the title of the painting is Girl Writing. And I don't know if you can see it, but she has wonderful red socks and she's at a desk and she's writing. So I've started a new blog, and it's going to appear about every 2 months in the Washington Independent Review of Books. And also, though I think you will love reading the Washington Independent Review of Books because of the book reviews and essays that others are always putting there. If you ever miss my blog, there's also a section of my website where you can go to my blog. But in this blog, it's going to be kind of fun for me. The last and first blog I wrote was about the titles of my books, how my 3 books came to have the names they have. And I'll be due to write another blog in about a month's time. And I've been having fun thinking about what I might write about. So for me, that's very good news. It's going to be fun.
And where can our viewers purchase your books?
Thank you for asking. And you know, this is a time when bookshops, just like so many other retail establishments, really need our support. I'm a big fan of small independent bookstores. I love the Curious Iguana in Frederick. I love the White Whale in Pittsburgh, who just invited me to read there a couple of weeks ago. And if you go to my website, you'll see that there's a site called IndieBound, which connects you to independent bookstores. Or there's a wonderful site that's not on my website yet, but I'm on there too, called bookshop.org. So you can contact your favorite independent bookstore directly. You can go to IndieBound or bookshop.org. And of course, there are the big, online sellers, and they are also a way to get books out there. But if you can be kind to an independent local bookstore, that's great. And as I say, two of my favorites happen to be the Curious Iguana and the White Whale. But I also love East City Books in DC and Politics and Prose. It's a long list. I'm in love with bookshops like I'm in love with libraries.
That's wonderful. And what is your local library?
Well, in Washington, D.C., we live walking distance to the Cleveland Park Library. Now, actually, at this moment in time, it's opened only in a very limited way, and that's true, I know, for most libraries everywhere. But one of the things I love about the Cleveland Park Library is even though I can't go in too easily right now, I can still get books online through the library. And that's been a really helpful thing during this season. But I'll admit, Sharon, I hang on to library cards. So I hold at the moment, I think, counting the Library of Congress, I think I own about 5 library cards, and I use them and will continue to use them as long as the libraries let me.
And do you have any special messages for our viewers?
Oh, well, I guess first of all, I would say thank you for reading, and also to those of you who are writers, I would say write, keep writing. And I would encourage anyone who's here to also know that the festival does events like this every Wednesday night. So even though we can't all be together at the festival, any Wednesday night, you can go to the festival, or if you miss a Wednesday night, you can go to the archive.
Yep. Thank you very much for that plug, Ellen. And I do have to announce that the next 2 Wednesdays, we have decided to take a hiatus, and we are going to be planning the next series of authors, and we're going to be going back through the authors who have appeared and sharing their books and things like that. So I think we're kind of wrapping up on time. If anybody has still a question to put in the Facebook feed, perhaps we can ask Ellen to go over after we finish. And if you are in the meeting, so please do stick around after, and we can chat then.
Thank you so much.
And I wish to thank you, Ellen, for participating in our virtual festival of books.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for including me.
Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you everybody watching too.
Good night.
Good night.